Yeah, so I mean, I obviously grew up reading a lot of books, and I love books. Doesn't mean books are the only medium of learning. Some people learn from YouTube videos, some people like audiobooks, some people like tweets, some people like blog posts. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about where you can find the highest signal to noise ratio. Books are uniquely interesting for a number of reasons. One is, unlike the synchronous media of YouTube and audiobooks, you can consume books asynchronously, which means that on one sentence you can spend an hour, and then the next paragraph you can spend a minute, and the next chapter you can spend a second as you slip through it. So, for anyone who's serious about absorbing knowledge, books are a much better medium. They're much more efficient. And the point of reading is not to stack up a giant stack pile of books that you then tweet out and say, current reading this week, look at how many books I read, thumping your chest. The point of reading and the point of reading is not even to necessarily absorb knowledge. In an age of Google, the knowledge is always a fingertip away. The act of reading is to spark the point of reading is to spark your own creativity and to spark your own thoughts. So it's almost like you're starting a fire in your brain. And so a really good book has to be read slowly. If you're reading books quickly and you're proud of the speed at which you're reading them, you're reading the wrong books. It's like lifting weights that are way too light. You're just cranking through the exercise. On the other hand, if you read a book that's way too difficult for you and you're just stuck and can't make any progress, then that's like trying to lift a weight that's too heavy. You can't even get a single rep off. But what you want is you want to lift a weight or read a book that is kind of at the edge of your ability, where you're learning more, and but it's a struggle. It's a little painful. It's a little confusing, but at the same time, it's sparking ideas and thoughts that then you have to add your own creativity and your own interpretations and apply to your own experiences to learn something. The books that excite me the most are the ones that make me smarter. They don't necessarily give me more knowledge or information. I'm not going to necessarily read a book on why water is the most important molecule in the world, or a biography of a famous general. But those books are always a fingertip away. I can pull them up and read them very quickly and easily if I need to or want to. But I'm not going to just absorb useless knowledge that I can just Google on demand. Rather, the books that I read are the ones that make me smarter. In fact, Brett Hall just joined the chat. And Brett is a teacher of physics and epistemology and runs this great podcast called the Theory of Knowledge podcast, which I've shilled before on my Twitter because it's actually probably the only podcast that I listen to religiously, because it makes me smarter, and because Brett is exploring this book called The Beginning of Infinity, which also is probably the best book I've read in the last decade and also made me a lot smarter. I wish I'd encountered it earlier. But that's not to say that reading that book is the end all and be all, and there's nothing magical about the book format. In fact, I don't think Deutsch, no offense to him, he's a brilliant thinker. I don't think he's the best writer because I think he's writing for other physicists, and so he's not writing for you and me. Or maybe if he tries, but it's hard for him to operate down at our lowly level. So people like Brett and myself and others can help interpret it, and as we chew on it, we can digest it and sort of pass it down. And there's a few chapters in The Beginning of Infinity, in the first few chapters actually, luckily enough, and the last few ones, weirdly enough, that are the most interesting and applicable for normal people. And I encourage everyone to go and digest those. And it took me, and I'll confess, to really get through The Beginning of Infinity and The Fabric of Reality, which is the precursor to The Beginning of Infinity. It took me about 2 years to get through it. And it's not to say it took me 2 years to read it. I'm a very fast reader. I probably can and did at some point read both books in a weekend, but it took me 2 years to actually understand the concepts in the book. And there are single paragraphs in there which sent me down rabbit holes of videos and podcasts and reading and looking at papers and opening up a physics textbook and so on, that consumed 2 months at a time. There was some comment about multiverse and the Schrodinger wave equation that had me in a tizzy for quite a while. And it's not to say that I still understand all of The Beginning of Infinity, but I understand enough of the concepts that now I've integrated into my core philosophy of decision making and judgment. So I don't think books are necessarily a sacred medium, but I think they're an important medium because, well, there are other reasons. Well, besides just asynchronous consumption, another important one is that a lot of the best work that has been written, especially if you're talking about philosophy or something that's not that modern, remember the old questions have old answers. Those were written a long time ago. And a lot of the things that they wrote down back then would be socially or politically incorrect to write today. Many writers are only famous after their own time. simply because their peers have to die out and stop condemning them for a new generation to come in and absorb whatever they wrote objectively, rather than through the lens of, well, this can't be right because my current society is not ready to absorb this truth. So I do recommend reading a lot of old books because I think for philosophy and wisdom, most of it has been said better before. You can always rephrase it in a new way, maybe apply it to a brand new thing that showed up, but the timeless questions have timeless answers. Another advantage of reading it through a book rather than watching it through a video is the author is a little more invisible to you. And that's good because that removes your ego from the equation. It's not like your friend next door telling you something. There's the old line, no man is a prophet in his own land. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I see this in my own social circles where I'll literally sit around with 20 people who are talking, let's say, about crypto or wealth creation. And I know what they're saying is wrong, but they're not going to ask me because I'm their friend. They've already kind of stuck me into the friend bucket. So we're peers. So they're not going to necessarily look up to me in that regard, or I may not look up to them in their areas of expertise. So if you can remove the speaker from the spoken, if you can remove the writer from the writing, then it allows you to absorb it with less in the way. It allows you to make it your own and then regurgitate it later, but again, through your own lens and in such a way that it becomes a part of the fabric of your thoughts. And so I do think that absorbing knowledge from a book, I find it to be higher quality absorption than if it's coming through a speaker. Maybe that's just me. There are some extremely good blogs out there. Unfortunately, due to cancel culture and just the decline of blogging in general, a lot of them have been disappearing off the internet. But I do think that some of the best content and writing that I've ever encountered was in blogs, long form blog posts floating around the internet. But that's a hard problem to dig through now. Google doesn't do a very good job of surfacing blog results. There was a time when they used to prioritize blog results much more highly than search. These days, if you search for anything on Google, you're just going to get a list of like 100 different official sources, which just kind of shows you that the manual tweaking of Google has been taken over by the usual trust and safety teams. So if you're going to find these good blogs, it's going to be through personal recommendations or social media, in kind of the dark corners of social media. So again, nothing magic about books, but Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett kind of say that everybody that they know who's smart is an avid reader, and I have a hard time refuting that. I have yet to meet someone who I would consider at a very high functioning level of intelligence who doesn't read for fun. Underline those last two words, for fun. Which is not to say that you should go and make it a chore to start reading. But one of the tweets I'm proudest of is read what you love until you love to read. So the goal here is not to go crack a physics textbook immediately, but just develop a love for reading if you can. Better done at an early age, because like everything else. And if you can develop a love for reading, then eventually you'll navigate your way to the things you're quote unquote supposed to read, just because you get bored of the trite stuff. A lot of the same points, same jokes, same observations will kind of strike you as pedestrian. And there is a certain magic to quantity, right? Once you get through enough books, you just become a better reader. It's like anything else. That said, the goal here is not to read the largest quantity of books, it's to read the highest quality of books. I will once again plug The Beginning of Infinity, and I'll say read it and spend 2 years on it if you have to, and listen to Brett's podcast, because if you can get through The Beginning of Infinity and really understand the core principles at a deep level, it's going to improve the quality of your thinking so much that your future books and blog posts and tweets that you pick up, you will be able to determine very, very quickly which ones are talking truth and which ones are talking trash. And believe me, your theory of knowledge right now is not good enough. Whatever you think it is, you can upgrade it. As we were talking about before, judgment is the most important thing.